Hey Nat, how are you?
Hey, Ange.
Listen, welcome to a new episode of Black Boomer Besties from Brooklyn. I'm going to be both Leslie and Angela today because Leslie is doing her doctoring, right? You all
Mhm.
know she's an anesthesiologist and she had every plan to be here, but her commitment to her patients has made it impossible for her to be here. So we are going to have this episode with her in spirit because she was almost in tears when she realized that she wasn't going to be able to make it. Um, you are also looking at a beautiful person who has a pretty sizable part of my heart and has for all of her years. So I'm going to introduce her in a second, but I wanted to start with welcome to a new episode of Black Boomer Besties from Brooklyn, Brooklyn, because that's what we do. That's what we do. So I want to welcome Natalie Hinds-Scott. She is my first niece.
Yes.
So she Oh my gosh. I already told her that my tissues are here because Natalie, um, whenever I am with her, physically or virtually,
Mhm.
I get very emotional because what I see in her is this little girl who I uh, came to just adore as a human being.
Mhm.
And when I see her, I think about that, but then I think about her as this um, mother, wife, business person, someone who brings light into every room, someone who the family kind of flocks to for advice, for beautification, for inspiration. She's the first HBCU graduate in the family. Um,
Hey.
you're not gonna do your thing. You're not gonna do your HBCU thing. You're not doing that. Should I
No,
do it
no.
for you?
You try.
You know, no. Oh, she's a proud NCCU graduate, and I've invited her here today because we an episode or two ago had a guest, Pam Skinner, who shared stories of her family legacy. She's an African American who is a classmate of mine from Brooklyn Tech, class of 80, go Tech. And I thought about the stories that we have in our family, in my family, the immigrant experience. And Natalie and her sister, Colleen Hines Rodgers, who also could not be here today, she came down with some weird illness, her entire family. And so, mommy duties, work duties, she's also an entrepreneur, has pulled her away. She may pop in, Leslie may pop in. And if they ask to be admitted, I will let them in. But they have been in the forefront of doing research on our family history. Natalie is related to me through my eldest brother, Clifford Hines. And so she and Colleen have done research on their father's side of the family and their mother's side of the family and have unearthed just amazing stories. So I want to talk about those stories. And I also would like her to talk about kind of how it all came together, some of the tips and tricks that she learned, some things that were challenges that can help people doing research outside of the United States, right? There is a wealth of information that's available um, for um, African families who were enslaved in the United States.
Mhm.
It's a different story when you are trying to trace your family history in other parts of the world. And so I know not that it's not every part of the world that you have experience with, but I think that your experience and that of Colleen's in doing research in another country is
Mhm.
going to be really informative for our audience. So, with that, I want to introduce my beloved Natalie Hinds-Scott. Take it away, Nat.
Hi, everybody. Well, for the longest time, well, family history has always been a big part of our upbringing. Our grandmother, which is Angela's mom, always told us stories. Even my dad
Yes.
sharing stories from his grandparents and all of the things. On that side of the family, though, we had real historians like my grandmother's sister, who
Mhm.
passed last year, who
Yeah.
lived to be, what was she, 95, 94, 95?
95. Can
Right.
I'm going to do segues all the time.
Yes.
Everybody knows I do this. I'm going to come right back.
Right. Yep.
First of all, let me just say this.
Hmm.
My grandparents, Natalie's great grandparents, were Garveyites.
Right.
I grew up with, yeah, there was a picture of Jesus,
Hmm.
but there was also pictures of Marcus Garvey in the house that I grew up in
Right.
Jamaica when I lived with my grandparents. Um, and this came to mind because two of my grandparents' four children were named. My uncle was named after Marcus Garvey,
Hmm.
and my aunt, the Aunt Amy that Natalie just mentioned, her name was Amy Jakes
Hmm.
Barnes, Nate Allen. So Amy Jakes, if you don't know, is the wife of Marcus Garvey. So
Yeah.
we come from those kinds of people,
Right.
very clear about their pride in being of African soil. And understanding our history and being very clear about who we are and who we're not. And
Right.
so, anyway, coming back, go ahead, Nat.
Right. But you're absolutely right. And in that vein, Aunt Amy had a lot of things that she shared with Colleen and myself. Colleen was the first one to delve in when she took that trip to Jamaica
Mm-hmm.
with you, and you guys went
Mm-hmm.
to the records office. You were able to research some things. But Aunt Amy, she was able to provide a picture of Papa's mother, which is
Mm,
my great great grandmother, a
right.
picture of one of his sisters, Aunt Manette,
Mm.
which is who your middle name and grandma's middle name is
And
after. And
Jassie's
those
middle
are
name,
two.
too.
Yeah, oh wow,
All three
yes.
of us. I think mommy loved her.
Yeah. And so that sort of information we would not have had even with as much research as we have done.
Right, right.
Um, Yeah, so we have a lot of info on that side of the family. Even Colleen was able to connect with some of the descendants that had gone to Costa Rica just through
Mm-hmm.
Facebook.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That,
Because in a lot of the
yeah.
Spanish speaking countries, they keep the maiden name and then they add on the married name. And so she was able
Yes.
to trace that Barnes name there. And
Yes.
they knew
Wow.
about us, they knew who we were, they knew
Wow.
Uncle Mowbray, which is my grandmother's uncle,
Right.
my
So my
great
grandfather's
grandfather's brother,
brother.
youngest
Yes.
brother.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, oh, he was like the father to her. And she's younger than us. And we're like, wow,
Yes.
like,
Oh my gosh.
yeah.
Wow.
Longevity
So
is also on our side because Uncle
it
Mowbray
is
was, what, about 97 or so when he passed?
definitely in his late 90s when
Yes.
he passed. Yeah. So
Right.
another segue.
Mm-hmm.
So if you heard the episode where my sister was a guest, she is an anthropologist, Dr. Gertrude Fraser, and she talked about one of the things she talked about is the fact that our family and that of many Caribbean families is that of leave taking, as she called it, right? We travel, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my grandfather's family is are Jamaicans who travel to Costa Rica. and
Right.
lived in Costa Rica. And
Right.
so this Uncle Mowbray that Natalie mentioned, he grew up in Costa Rica,
Mm-hmm.
right? I
Mm-hmm.
remember his gold tooth and
Mm-hmm.
his
Mm-hmm.
gold tooth.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And but his brother, being was he the first or the last
Uncle
grandson?
Mowbray was the only um, child of the Barnes that was born in Costa Rica. All of the
Okay.
rest were born in Jamaica. She would travel pregnant, have the children in Jamaica so that they would be considered British subjects and go back to Costa
Ah,
Rica.
right, right. So,
So they were
so
all raised in Costa Rica. Uncle Mowbray was the only one born in Costa Rica.
right, right. Okay, perfect. And
Mhm.
that is significant what was mentioned about being British subjects as a result of being born in Jamaica, because it became one of the things that helped my grandfather in some trouble he got into in Cuba. We'll talk about that later. But the fact that he could claim himself as a British subject allowed him to be able to leave the country of his, not of his free will, but to leave his country
In one
still living
piece.
and breathing.
That's right. Right.
So that's significant. And the other thing that I'll say about that before I bring you, allow you back in, that is that when my family um, emigrated from Jamaica to America in late 1970, we
Mhm.
actually lived with Uncle Mowbray and his wife and her sister, who were Panamanians. And so,
Yeah. Yeah.
right. And so, as you know, Grandma traveled to Panama quite a few times, and it was to visit them
Yes.
because that was the connection, and they became really, really close.
Mhm.
Um, and they cared for her until she was able to buy a house and bring her family up. I remember
Mhm.
when we came up, our first night was spent at their house. Obviously, went there many times after, but we
Right.
stayed at their house after coming from
Mhm.
the airport, and then we went to the house that the brownstone that Mommy had bought in Brooklyn.
Right.
So a lot of layers to this that kind of give you the sense of how much moving around we do as a family, and why this oral history is so important. It's so important. You know what I mean? So
Absolutely.
this idea
And I
that,
really think like your side of the family, like we're huge on oral history.
yeah, yeah.
Everything was passed down orally,
Hmm, hmm.
you know?
Yeah, yeah. That's amazing. Okay, go back in. Tributary is finished. You were always kind of hearing about these stories, and Aunt Amy was able to show you these pictures now. So now you have these visuals to kind of fill in the gaps. Um,
Right.
how else did you do your research, and what did you uncover?
So Colleen, my sister, was very actively involved in that early on. And then, life happens, we take breaks, we get back into it. I remember the first time where I really was like, wow, I really want to know is after you and Colleen had gone to Jamaica.
Hmm.
And at the time, the RGD, Registered General Department in
Yeah.
Jamaica,
Hmm,
in
hmm.
Spanish Town,
In
you
Spanish Town,
could,
yeah.
yeah, pay them hourly and they would email you any certificates or anything that they found, like any of
Okay.
the research that they
Okay.
found if you were not there.
See,
Now
I
they
didn't
have,
know that. I didn't
yeah.
know that because when
Yeah.
Colleen and I went down, by the way, this
Hmm.
was Colleen's idea. I take no credit for it. I just went along for this exciting trip of discovery with my amazing niece who had
Right.
done part of her master's program was at the university in Jamaica. So
Yeah, you check. Yeah.
she invited me down, and we went. And as Nat said, we went to this the records office in Spanish Town. And at
Hmm.
that time, they assign you an archivist. So I didn't even know they had this email thing going on after the
Right.
fact.
So the same archivist that you are assigned, if you pay for more hours, upon your departure,
Mhm.
they will then email. It probably take them about 3 months, but
Right, right.
they
You'll
at
get
the
it.
time would email you
It's
any.
quicker than snail mail still. It's
Hey, now they have an online system where you can
right,
actually pay.
right.
Because for the longest time, you either had to be there in person to pay them
Yes.
or send
Right,
somebody
right,
on your
right,
behalf to
right.
do the research. So
Yeah.
she got some certificates emailed back to
Hmm.
her, and
Hmm.
seeing that made me really excited. Like, oh my
Wow.
gosh, like this is a record.
Yeah.
Like, really?
Yeah.
Like,
A
oh
real
my God.
thing.
Yeah,
Handwriting and all of
correct.
this is, when we went, it wasn't even on microfiche or anything. They brought
Right.
out these
The
books
books. Right. Yes. And they still
and
have
flip
the books.
it like, and you
Yeah.
see your great grandparents' names and where they were married and who
Right.
was there and
Right.
what their professions were, and the way that they distinguish labor or things like that. We may have a view of what those words mean, but they gave a lot
Right.
of context. Well, if they
Yes.
lived here, that means that they were this status. If they live
Right.
there, right, or it's unusual for these two people to come together, all of those things.
Right.
These folks in Jamaica, they really, really know their stuff. So
Yeah.
slow and steady. If you take that route, you will get the information because um, they take their expertise very seriously.
Right. Emphasis on
Yeah.
the
So
slow, but yes,
yeah.
it will. But it gets done.
It gets done. Just look,
It's
just slow your roll. This is Jamaica. What do you expect? Take your time, eat your mango,
right.
talk to Miss Nata down the
Exactly.
road, and then you'll get it. And you get it.
But of
And
course, this
everything.
was years ago. So,
Right,
in their
right.
defense, the last time I was at the records office was 2015.
Okay,
And so
okay.
since then, they have started the online thing,
Hmm.
which I have not utilized yet. So it may be, quicker or more
Well
efficient at this
advanced. Right,
point.
right, right,
Yes.
right. Okay, okay. Awesome, awesome.
Right.
So
So
you got all
that's
excited.
yeah, that sparked my interest. So I'm like, okay. So we had so much information on my dad's side, which is your side of the family.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
said, I really didn't have too much on my mom's side. Only
Right.
interviews my sister would have with all of my grandparents. She would just jot down information and stuff like that. So I started my research journey then. I signed up for Amazon, not Amazon, oh my gosh, Amazon everything, right? But Ancestry, Ancestry.com, and attempted to research and, hit a lot of brick walls on
Mm,
Ancestry. Could not
mm,
get but so far.
right.
Um, and
Like, how did
just
you know it was a brick wall? Like, how did you?
couldn't
How
really
did
find
you?
information. So if I'm searching for a particular name, I may find, like, say, searching for my mother's father's name.
Hmm. Hmm.
I got information of when he traveled to the United States,
Okay.
like a ship. Um, what do you call it? Like the boarding, the information from the ship, the
Yeah, I
passenger
forget what it's
log
called.
from the ship
Yes,
saying,
yes. Hmm.
what
Hmm.
ship he was on, where he was
Right.
from. It
Right.
may have had some detailed information. It did help me in a sense that I saw another person. My mother's maiden name is Ridgard. I saw another
Hmm.
person with the same last name
Hmm.
listed on the list further down. And I'm like, okay, they
Hmm.
have to
Hmm.
be related. But I
Hmm.
didn't recognize the name. And as I
Hmm.
dug further, I'm like, oh, that's his brother. But we know that he has a brother named Georgie. This
Right.
person was listed as Aubrey Ridgard. Come to find out, his middle name is George, Aubrey George Ridgard. And
Jamaican
so
people.
that's the
Jamaican
thing.
people,
That's
and
another
this was
roadblock in research, is that a lot
right.
of times we don't know close relatives' full names. Like,
Yes, yes,
you call
yes, yes,
somebody
yes,
a name your whole life
yes.
and you come
Yeah.
to find out, oh wow, that's not even their first name. Like,
Right, right, right. I
that.
told Kai the other day that that Uncle Bito's name was Marcus. And
Right,
Kai was like, "What?
right.
We all know him as Uncle Bito."
Yes,
And the story
forever.
that mommy told me is that my grandparents had a really close friend in Cuba
Hmm.
named Albert. And for
Okay.
some reason, they started to call Uncle Bito Bebito, like
Okay.
little Albert in a
Well,
way.
yes,
And it
sure.
stuck. And so we
Right.
never knew him as Marcus. It's only as a big woman I knew him as Marcus. So how would you have found if you saw Marcus?
Correct. I only
Yes,
know he was
yes.
Marcus because his grandson is named for him. And so
Right,
we
right,
know
right, right.
them, his grandchildren growing up,
Yes, yes,
we've
yes,
had
yes.
interactions with them, but
Right.
not because I knew. You know what I mean? Not
Not
because I knew
because
him
that's what we
personally.
ever called him.
Right, at all. So, a lot of that,
Yeah, yeah,
and just a lot of the Jamaican records, there just were not a lot of them
yeah, yeah.
for
Okay.
what I was looking for at the time.
Hmm.
So I was able to find this site called Family Search. So it's www.familysearch.org. And
Okay.
that surprisingly had so many digitized Jamaican records.
Wow.
That was like a godsend to my
Oh my
research.
gosh.
Like,
How did you find
real.
that? Like, how did you?
I don't remember if I just Googled like,
Right.
Jamaican genealogy or,
Yes,
I
yes,
would
yes,
read a
yes.
lot of whether it was blogs or
Right,
watching shows about ancestry
right,
research and different
right.
things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not quite sure how I stumbled across it. I'm sure I
Yeah.
probably Googled it because,
So we'll put that in the episode notes, guys. But
yeah,
yeah, thank you for your perseverance because that kind of
yeah.
opened things like wide open for you.
Yeah, it's addictive too, right? So when you start, it's like you want to find these answers. You want to
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
the answers, but then you get tired and then I might give it a rest for a month or two and then come
hmm,
back to it. And then lo and behold, there's new information. Maybe new records have
yes,
been digitized that were not
right,
available
right.
prior. So,
Yes, 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 yes.
when I was researching my mom's family, I hit a roadblock when we got to the point where my grandfather's grandfather, we knew his name because he
Hmm.
was listed on his children's birth certificates and
Ah,
such,
okay.
but we could not
Okay.
find his birth certificate. And I figured
Ah,
from the
hmm.
time frame that he would have been born during slavery.
Okay.
And I did not know how to go about, if not for Family Search, I didn't know another way to go about finding those records.
Okay.
So I gave that a rest and I started from the top going down, right? So I
Hmm.
started researching any English or Scottish men that were in the area with that last name. That is not a common last name on the
Right,
island,
right,
Rigard.
right.
And
Yes.
on the island anyway, they say anybody with the same last name is related. They always say that.
Somehow, and they are.
And they are, right? I mean, it's a small island,
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
yeah, pretty
Hmm.
much. And
Hmm.
so I found the name of an attorney called William Ridgard,
Hmm.
and it said that he was like overseer on several plantations in St. Elizabeth and in Westmoreland. Well, my mother's family is from Westmoreland, so I said,
Right, right.
okay, this guy's got to have something to do with
Hmm.
something.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I was able to research his information, of course, because
Hmm.
he's British, everything is well documented,
Hmm.
but I
Hmm.
could not find the exact connection to my great great grandfather
Okay. And what
with
was
him.
his name? What was
His name
this person whose name that you were
William
following?
Ridgard.
William.
William
Okay.
Ridgard was the Englishman.
Okay.
My two times great grandfather was Richard Ridgard.
Gotcha. Okay.
So now I had found, in the meantime, I had found records with William Ridgard having children with other enslaved people.
Right, right.
And I was able to trace them down the line right to cousins that my mom's cousins' children, who we had
Hmm.
recently made contact with and gotten pretty close with, and
Hmm.
we were all in on this research. So I was able to connect them straight away.
Right. You have
But
to
for
tell,
me,
that's not a summary statement. That's a whole nother story of that part of don't listen. Don't leave
hey,
anything out, Natalie.
well, a
Just
lot of these white men that were on these plantations, whether they were paid to procreate, to make
Yes.
more people to do more work, or
Right. Right.
whether they were in relationships. I'm not sure. The
Right.
record that I was able to find was his relationship with a young woman named Mary Moraes, who was, they had her listed as a 15-year-old mulatto young
Mm-hmm.
woman who was on one of the plantations.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
he had a number of children with her. I was able to request his will online through the National Archives from England, and
What?
I was able to read it. Again, my two times grandfather was not listed in the will, but the
Right.
children
Right.
that he had with this Jamaican young woman
Right.
were listed in his will. And through those children, was able to trace them down the line to
Uh-huh.
who I know, my cousins, to my,
Right.
yes.
Right. Right. Right.
Again, no trace of my particular ancestor that I was looking for.
Got you.
So here enters, well, side note. So this is all going on simultaneous to this. So my sister and I decide, okay, we're going to make a Facebook page called Regard Family Tree. We're going to ask the cousins that we know to come in, add any information, any stories, family history, pictures that they may have. And we just have this kind of home base where we can all just go to show our kids,
Right.
add stories, add any information as it's updated.
Right. Right.
It had little interest. And right when I was thinking about, okay, I'm going to take this down, I got a message from a young lady in England who was saying that her great grandfather's name was Philip Ridgard, and she told me her whole story. And I'm like,
This was
I
totally
know,
random. Totally
totally random.
random.
I
And
don't,
you were
never
ready
met.
to to give it up. You weren't even going to let it just sit out there. You were
Stay
going to
there and
shut it
be there.
down.
No, it
Okay.
was working my nerve that nobody was as interested as me. So I
Hashtag
was really going to take
hashtag
it.
slow your roll. Slow
Yes,
your roll.
I was
Hashtag
really
no
going to take it
ego.
down. Yeah, we had a couple of cousins who had written things, posted pictures. And then here I get this message from a cousin named Louise, who was in England, and inquiring about her great grandfather. Her mother and herself wanted to learn about their great grandfather, if there was any information that we had or if we knew who he was.
Right. Right.
Now, fortunately, I knew the name. I
Yes.
had never met the person because he
Right.
was deceased long before I was born. But
Yes.
he was my mother's grandfather's brother, but they
Got you.
lived on the same road. So she would
Okay.
go there every Sunday. She would be at his house with he and his wife. And,
Uh-huh.
he really took on the grandfather role. She says he was the one who explained to her what had happened to her grandfather. Her grandfather passed away young from a brain aneurysm. So he was the one that
Ah.
explained that to
Right.
her and,
Right.
just took his time, just really planting seeds. She loved him. She loved him. And
Mm.
so to hear her say Philip Ridgard, and I just know him as Uncle Phil just from all the stories my mom has
Right.
heard,
Right.
we were able to connect the dots. And her sister Kate reached out to me, and we were really able to really forge a really strong bond. She's an Aries too, so maybe that has but
You're just one of those. You're just one of those people, Nat. Your heart is so big, and like, I mean, anyone looking at you right now can just feel your energy. You're so approachable. You're like, all the things. I have my tissue. Did I mention I have my tissue? I have my tissue. I have my tissue. So, I mean, really, because I'm sure that Kate, who I now know, and you'll tell the
right,
story of that,
right,
if if you had a different, by now you're feeling kind of, this ain't working, whatever,
right.
and I'm sure, and she is mixed. If you were to look at her,
Right,
you have to kind of look with your eye. Quint
right,
is
right,
that she had some kind of mix
right.
up business,
Yes, her
but
father is white and her
yeah,
mother is of Jamaican descent,
right,
mixed up
right,
too, but yes,
right,
of Jamaican
right.
descent. Yes.
So in Jamaica, we would put royal, like when it's a
Right.
black person and a Chinese or Indian, it's
Hmm.
coolie royal or Chinese royal is the term.
Right.
I don't even know if that's still okay. I hope I'm not offending anyone, but that is the old term that we used to use when there was inter mixing, as we would say. So
Right.
okay, so Kate is now in the picture.
Correct.
Okay, and
So
you and
she's
her get
finishing her
close.
studies in England, and she reached out. Like I said, we started emailing each other back and forth. Just so happened our family had a trip planned to Jamaica
Hmm.
that year, that July, I believe. You and your family were going to be there during that time
Yes.
frame. My dad was going to be there for something else during that time
Hmm.
frame. My mom, my stepdad, my sister, my nieces, my husband, myself, my children were
Right.
going to be
Wow.
there. And
Just in time.
yeah, literally. I said to her, do you think you would want to come? I mean, that would be a great opportunity for you to for us to show you and for you to
Right.
meet family as opposed to
Yeah.
going on your own.
Yeah.
You had never been to Jamaica.
Right. Right.
So
Right.
she decided to come. And we met her at the airport. We stayed together. She stayed with us. And it's like almost like your spirit just recognizes family. I mean, we bonded so closely. We were just, I mean, it, God
Wow.
absolutely orchestrated that,
Wow.
how
Yeah.
everything
Yeah.
worked out.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
one of my mom's cousin, we call him Bobsy.
Hmm.
I don't even know, I don't remember Bobsy. Oh, Patrick is his real name. I'm sorry. Well, we call him Bobsy, right? So again, right? That's the
Right. Right. Yeah.
Friend Bobsy, who was a driver for Judah, which is the Jamaican Transportation Authority.
Hmm. Hmm.
He drove a van for them.
Hmm.
He picked us up from the airport and everything. And when she saw him, she cried. She literally cried tears that he looked like her grandmother so
Oh my God.
much.
Oh my
Like
God.
she knew she was in the presence of her
Oh.
long lost family, and she literally was just like, and I forgot to mention her grandmother,
Hmm.
who was from Jamaica, went to England during the Windrush in
Hmm.
1948.
Right.
She
So
was never
sorry,
able to.
just a
Mhm.
point of information, Windrush. If you guys remember when we had the conversation about the African American family, there were a lot of terms that Pam and Leslie were throwing around that I did not understand. They had to explain what Camp Minnesink, and all this stuff to me. They were like, oh, everybody knows that. No, everybody didn't know that. They had to explain. So I'm going to just take a moment to explain what Windrush is.
Yes,
So during
yes.
World War II, um, the British invited um, people from the Caribbean to come to England to help them in the war effort.
Hmm.
Right, so they fought in the war. They were nurses. They were all the things. They were, probably given the menial tasks that were necessary, but they were critical to the war effort in World War II. And so Windrush is the ship that most of them came over on. So they call this the Windrush generation.
Yeah.
And you may have heard in the last few years, there was a big uproar in the British Parliament because they were treating the descendants of these people who came and practically saved England's ass.
Hmm.
Um, because it was done in this fashion, they were saying that they were illegal because they didn't come, they didn't give them citizenship and things like that. So their children, grandchildren, some were sent back to Jamaica, had never ever lived in
Been
Jamaica, were
in
born
your
in
life,
England,
right?
and just
Yeah.
cast aside um, in this way. So I will put some links to all of that hubbub in and discussed in the episode notes, so you can do a little bit more research on that. But that is when Nat mentioned Windrush. That's what that was all about, and that is how Kate's
Right.
grandmother came to
And
be,
grandfather came
and
to be in
grandfather.
England,
Okay,
right? Grandfather
okay,
was also
got it,
Jamaican.
Got it. Okay.
Grandmother was a teacher in Jamaica,
Hmm.
went to England and thought all her credentials would transfer over, but
Yeah.
not so.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
she had to, I forgot what kind of job, but she had to do, some manual labor jobs
Yeah.
until she
Domestic
was
jobs.
able,
Yeah.
yes, to get
Mm-hmm.
her British teaching certification. But
Mm-hmm.
in all of that, she was never able to return to Jamaica. So she
Oh.
really had never even seen her parents since she left Jamaica.
Oh
She was able
my.
to keep
Wow.
in contact, but not, and at that time, keep in contact means writing letters
Yes. Yes.
or
Yes.
telling,
Yes.
maybe a telegram if something
Right.
emergency,
Telegram. Yeah. Yeah.
happened. So her
Yeah.
grandmother was 95 also, and she passed away maybe a month before we were to go on this trip
Hmm.
together.
Hmm.
Her grandmother was living in New Zealand with one of her aunties, and
Hmm.
they sent some of her ashes to Kate. And Kate said she was going to bring her ashes to Jamaica to reunite her with her parents.
If this doesn't
Um,
become a made-for-TV movie,
I
if this
know.
doesn't become, so that happened just before this trip was planned, that
Yes.
miraculously Kate had reached out, found you, this big trip. We don't travel in that big a pack
No.
ever.
Right. Right. I don't know that we've ever all been in
Ever.
Jamaica at the same time,
Everybody
ever.
was there.
We're all there, literally. For different reasons. We didn't coordinate it together
We did not
either. It's
coordinate. To
just,
God be the
yes,
glory. I'm telling you.
yes,
So Kate decides to come. Oh my
yep.
God. With
So
with her grandmother's
ashes. And so,
ashes.
so she came before we got there. Mommy had coordinated with some of her cousins, Bobsy, another cousin. She's a pastor. Her name is Irene
Mhm.
Gordon, but we
I
call her
met
Auntie
her. Yeah,
Reenie.
yeah.
Yes.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so Auntie Reenie coordinated with the people who now lived on the land where Kate's great grandparents lived
Okay.
and were
Okay.
buried,
Right.
um, to ask permission if we could,
Hmm.
enter the land, if we could
Yeah.
explain to her what we wanted to do too. And the lady
Right.
was
Right.
very accommodating. Actually, she came
Yeah.
outside and during the ceremony with us
Yeah.
too. We were
So
able,
in Jamaica, we bury our family in our community, not in a, we usually have designated grave sites. It could be
right,
right next to your house,
yeah,
right? If you know, ours on your grandmother's side, my mom, it was
mhm,
right next to on Fraser property, and that is where all the generations are buried. We don't take our dead elsewhere. We don't go to big cemeteries. Maybe in the cities in Kingston, maybe they do that
right.
because
And
land is
maybe
bigger.
now more than then, but then
Right. But even the
absolutely.
other day, people who
That's
that
true.
I know died in Jamaica, they're buried on the gravesite.
Right there. That's true. My
They're buried
grandfather
right
died
there.
in 2009 and he's buried on
Yeah,
his
he's
property.
buried
Yes,
right there. So
yes.
another very, very big difference with the culture here. And I don't know how it is in rural communities all over the United States, but I know that that is probably uncommon. And the other thing that I wanted to touch on that you said is that your family lived in this area, and if I remember, this area is very close to where the sugar plantation was that your
Absolutely.
the
Within 10,
enslaved.
15 miles of the plantation is where the majority of my mother's family still lives.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
a lot of them have now passed,
Right, right.
but lived
That's
up
where they're
until her
buried.
death. Yes, correct. Yep.
That's where they're buried. And,
Yep.
Leslie had asked me at one point, why they stayed there. And another point that I'll make is that if you think about it, the transportation system isn't in Jamaica isn't like it is here, right? Here, you had the Great Migration and things like that that allowed people to move to different parts of the United States. But in Jamaica, it wasn't the same situation where you could really get on a train en masse and travel. It's a small island. So you just kind of branch out into the area that you know. And so
Correct.
they lived 10 miles from where their ancestors were, were enslaved and brutalized.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
As a matter of fact, well, did I even get to that part yet?
Which one?
I'll get to
Say,
that
you
part.
can
I was
repeat.
going to
It does
say
not
the
matter.
plantation, the Mesopotamia plantation, where we were able to trace my mom's ancestors to, is
Mm-hmm.
now a park, like a how do I say it? Like they have a river, like an adventure park.
Mm-hmm.
Not with a lot of rides and
Wow.
stuff, but like
Yeah.
you can
Yeah.
picnic there. You can like it's
Wow.
yeah. We just kind of recently found that out. I don't. It must be something new because when we went
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
land, that was not there
Right.
at that
Right.
time.
Right. Right. Wow.
Yeah,
I
and it
know
still
that in
keeps the
things,
name. Actually,
it has the same name,
it's still referred to as Mesopotamia. Yeah.
but not plantation. Not like.
No, no, not plantation. Not plantation. No.
Well, I don't know if, but I know that it was common for canals to be brought into areas where there were plantations to help with
Right.
the transportation of the cane and
Right.
the products that came from cane. So maybe there are things like that that
Well, you know what? It's right near the Cabarita River.
okay,
So that
okay,
is, I'm sure that,
yeah,
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 right.
wow. Man,
So
Kate's head must have been
it was so
exploding.
much to take in. It was almost like the amount of love and gratitude and everything was just, it's unexplainable. Like it's almost
Right.
if you were not there, there's
Yeah,
not really a way to put it into words what the
yeah, yeah.
feeling and the vibe was like because it
Hmm, hmm.
just was unexplainable. It's like,
Yeah, yeah.
she didn't know us from a can of paint. And at one point, I remember thinking, oh my gosh, what if she's crazy? Like, I'm thinking, and then I had to stop myself, like, okay, it's like the hundred of us, and like she's coming by herself. What if she thinks we're great? Like, well, of course, that quickly went out my head, and
Oh
there
my gosh.
was nothing
Right.
of the sort,
Oh
not
my
even.
gosh.
I mean, it just felt so incredibly
Ah,
genuine,
yes.
authentic, just
Oh
like
my
life
gosh.
giving. I don't even know how to explain it. We were able
Mm,
to take
mm.
her to the property where her great grandparents lived.
Yeah.
The gentleman who buried them was still
Mhm.
alive. He was in his 90s, walking up and down. We were able to talk to him. He was able to show us the exact spot. The next door neighbor, who also worked helping out her great grandmother in the house, Miss Lucille,
Mhm.
she was 96 and she was blind.
Mm.
But as soon as when she talked to my mom and her daughters, some of her daughters
Yes.
were there that remembered mommy that had grown up
Yeah.
together,
Yeah.
and Miss Lucille, and Miss Lucille was able to tell Kate about her grandmother and
Ah.
feel her face, touch her hands, get
Oh.
pictures. It was just tell her stories about her grandmother's brother and how they used to dig yam together and how
Oh
he was a
my God.
jokester and different things that you just wouldn't
Right.
get from,
Yes.
an ordinary
Yes.
visit. She was
Right.
able to
Right.
meet the son of her grandmother's best friend, which they knew
Mm.
the name of the grandmother's best friend. They just never knew who she was.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and so when he met her, he's telling her all about, different things. And we were able to
Incredible.
lay her grandmother's ashes to rest on top of her parents. My cousin, Auntie Rini, said, that was the first day it had rained in months. So that must be God trying to just solidify her grandmother
Oh
with
my
her
God.
parents. And it was just
Oh.
undescribable.
Mm.
We
Oh
had
my
such a
gosh.
wonderful time. We stayed at Auntie Reni's house, so she was able to
Mm.
stay in Westmoreland. We went to visit you at
Right.
grandma's house,
Right.
other side of
Right.
family house, and
Yes.
we
So
all
we've just
ate.
coincidentally, now we don't believe in coincidence,
Right.
but my father's side of the family is
Yes.
also from Westmoreland, right?
Right.
And Natalie's father, my first brother,
Mhm.
is is my mother's firstborn, not my
Right.
father's firstborn, right?
Right.
We never grew up with
Don't
any
say half
distinctions.
anything, right?
We
So we
don't we
just,
don't do that. We don't do
right.
that. My first brother, my eldest brother, the king, um, is Natalie's father. So the fact that my mom actually moved when she left Jamaica, I mean, when she left America and moved back to Jamaica, she moved back to Westmoreland,
Right.
where she, had her youth and was a social welfare officer. So the fact that Lilith, Natalie's mom,
Hmm.
who did not meet my brother in Jamaica,
No, they
they
met in
met.
Jamaica.
They met
They
in.
weren't, they didn't
Did they?
marry in
They weren't.
Jamaica. They
Were
weren't
they?
dating
Were
in
they
Jamaica. It
dating?
was,
They just knew of each other.
yeah, they would hang
They
out
knew of
together
each
at the
other.
same
They were
time. Yeah.
hanging out.
You know what's funny? Because Grandpa Fraser, which is Angie's dad, which is technically not my biological grandfather, but the only grandfather that I know, and I've
Right.
never called him anything other than that. He
Right.
would tell my sister and I stories about how when he was working age, I don't know how old, that he remembers my mom participating in 4-H club
They were
activities.
all into 4-H. Yes, me and
Yes.
mommy were all into 4-H.
And that's
Oh
way
my
before
gosh.
my parents met each other. That was,
Yes.
right.
Damn. This is a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh my God. This is a
Small
lot.
island, right?
Wow.
It is what it is.
It's
Yep.
Yeah, but this is the small of the small. I mean, on
Right.
another episode, we'll talk about some discoveries that Mark,
Yeah.
Uncle Mark had, because
Yeah.
it's just like incredible how this stuff
Yeah.
comes together. But anyway, we
Yes.
digress. Come on back,
Right.
because there's another really juicy part of the story
Yes.
that Nat, you have to get to.
Right. So we come back from Jamaica and we're like really in go mode, like really wanting to connect the pieces of this research and all of these things. So I decided I was going to Google some more and just see what I could find. And a book came up called A Tale of Two Plantations by a gentleman called Richard Dunn. So I WhatsApped Kate and I'm like, this book, because I was just searching by the name, and
Mm-hmm.
our ancestor, our 2 times great grandfather, Richard Ridgard's name came up on the Google saying that he was in that book. So we're like,
Right.
we got to get this book. So she orders hers. I order mine. She gets hers before me. She starts reading and she's like, they had his name. I don't know if this is middle initial or something that was wrong. So she was wondering, is this the right person or not?
Mm-hmm.
So in the meantime, she decided to reach out to the publisher. The
Princess
publisher,
Kate.
yeah,
Okay.
the publisher got back to her. Simultaneously, now I see that there's a companion website that goes with this book. I log on to this companion website, and Richard Dunn, to be clear, he was a historian, he was an author, he was the head of the history department at Penn State, he
Mm-hmm.
worked at Harvard University, all of the things. He passed away in 2022, January 2022, at 93 years old.
Wow.
Um, so he, and this, so I found the companion website, searched my ancestor's name, and here pops up the link between William Ridgard, the Englishman. It says Quadroon Richard Ridgard, my 2 times great grandfather,
Yeah.
the son of William Ridgard, attorney, and Fanny Fisher, the headmistress of the Great House, they call it. And I'm like, that's him! So now I'm like, I call Kate. I'm not even WhatsApping nothing. I'm like, we need to hear some voice. I need some audio on this. So I call her and she's like, what? Oh my gosh, this and that. So we're talking about it, we're this and that. She was waiting to hear back from the publisher at that point, but she did get an email back. And
With the mistake that she.
yes,
she
Richard
noted.
Dunn
Right,
said,
right.
oh, he's sorry, he did make an error. It would be corrected in the next edition of the book that was released.
Uh-huh.
A day before that, I see that he's giving a lecture about 15 minutes from our home about the new book that was published.
So I'm like, Kate, when you hear back from him, tell him we're going to be at the lecture. We're going to be at the lecture. So my mom, my sister, myself.
At this point, he doesn't know you exist. He just
No,
got this random email from Kate about this correction that he needs
correct.
to make. And then here
Then
you
she gave him
come.
a little bit of background when she started corresponding with him.
Okay, got it, got it, got it. Okay,
So
yes.
another part of the mystery, which I don't even know if I had shared this at the time with you, is that Kate's aunt is named Andrea Levy. This is
Okay,
her mom's sister, daughter of her grandmother, same side of family.
right.
She was like a wonderful novelist in
Mhm,
Britain, speaking on Caribbean experience or being a Black Brit Caribbean, first generation, all of the things. And
mhm,
she wrote several books, two
mhm.
of which were turned into movies, one called Small Island, one called The Long Song. Uh, he was familiar with her work, and one of his good friends had used some of her writings to do research for a book that he was writing. We also met him that evening, the McDonald's.
But Mr. Dunn never knew that there was a connection between that
No,
person and this
no, he
research
never
that
knew
he'd
her
been doing for
personally
40
either.
years. What?
Yes, he never knew Andrea Levy personally either. He just knows the name. He's in the world of writing, right? So you kind of,
Right,
and you're
right.
researching similar things. So in the
Yes.
meantime, they don't know the exact family history, but these
Right.
books that Kate's auntie Andrea wrote were the first one, Small Island, is kind of about the Windrush experience and coming from
Hmm.
Jamaica and going
Hmm.
to there. I was able to get that movie.
Hmm.
Um, my husband works in IT, so however he
Yes.
was
So
able
you,
to get it, right?
no one
The
needs to
other
know.
one,
No one needs to
I know,
know.
other one, the long song came out actually on PBS after Andrea passed away in when did she pass away? When did she pass away? I'm not sure,
Just
but
roughly.
fairly recently, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And like maybe 2019 or so,
Okay, okay.
from breast cancer. She had been battling for about 15 years.
Mm.
She PBS showed her movie, The Long Song. I was trying to get that for longest time, but BBC had that on lock. They're like, no, can't, sorry, no. Um, Watched it as a family on PBS. It was like a 3 or 4 night
Ah,
miniseries,
right,
and it
right.
really kind of echoed what she thought plantation life and different things, and it really is kind
Mhm.
of loosely based on our family. The
Yes,
information that she did not have at the time when she wrote the book
yes,
or they made the
yes.
movie, but
Right. Oh my God.
just aligned anyway, right? So that's on the sidebar. But
Oh.
we met Richard Dunn at his lecture, and we're in touch with him since then. When he would come to Philadelphia from Massachusetts, he would stay with the McDonald family. We met up for lunch with the whole
Right.
family.
Oh
Colleen
my
couldn't go there, so
gosh.
when she traveled for work to Massachusetts, she went to his home. She met his family.
Oh
And,
my God.
he had done 40 years of research, and his book
Hmm.
was published, I believe, 2014 or 2015. And
Hmm.
so it just culminated. He started his research in the 70s. We were born in the 70s. Like, this is God's orchestration, right?
Yes.
Because it would not have been available at any other time than the time that we were
That
looking.
you found it.
Yes. And
And so
so,
his all of his research came to this point and it buck
yeah,
up there.
yes.
And your research came this way and it buck up
Right.
here.
Yep. And we were able to marry the two, and he was able to know what happened to the descendants of the. So his book, A Tale of Two Plantations, was based on studying one plantation in Jamaica and one
Hmm.
in Virginia, and
Hmm.
just studying. Both plantations kept immaculate inventories and records, so he was able to really sketch a life based on the information that he was able
Hmm.
to find, sketch the
Hmm.
lives of hundreds of
Hmm.
enslaved people,
Hmm.
and note the similarities or the differences based on the
Right.
environment or anything. And
Right, right.
actually, learning so much from even his research that the
Yeah.
average life expectancy of an enslaved person in Jamaica was only 7 years.
What?
7 years. 7 years.
So they were not trying to
No, spare
make
nothing.
them spare
No, no.
nothing so they could work for as many years as possible. They were just what?
And he
7?
wasn't trying to say that any one situation was better than the other
Better.
because
Yeah,
no,
it's
there's
just
no such
difference.
thing. But
Yeah, yeah.
the men from the excruciating labor, a lot of the women from disease and malnutrition, and reproduction was on a downward slope, and whereas in Virginia it was on an upward slope.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why even in the West Indies we had however many times more slaves than to the U.S.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
We're closer, they would just go back and get more because
Right,
of
right.
high
Proximity. Yeah.
turnover rate, so to speak,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Damn.
And he picked our ancestor to study because, as he referred to her, she was one of the more prolific mothers on the plantation, giving birth to 14 children, which was highly
Wow.
uncommon at that time in that
Right.
environment.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Colleen had
So,
mentioned that a lot of the women too weren't even having their menses because
correct.
their bodies were not
Malnutrition, over,
developing. Yeah.
yes, all of the things, right? So
Damn.
it was, yeah.
Yeah.
But we were able to piece that together. He was able to take
Mhm.
us basically into the 1700s to find
Right,
our
right.
4 times great grandmother named Minnie, who was of the Mesopotamia Plantation in Westmoreland. And she was born on the plantation. We know that because the terminology Creole refers to a person of African descent, but that is born on the island.
Born. Okay. Okay.
If they were born in Africa, it would refer to them as
Wow.
African. But she was
Right,
born on
right.
the island, but it did not at that point list her parents.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
but because he studied so many people on the plantation,
Mm-hmm.
he personally was able to kind of narrow down who he thought at least her mother could be, and for her to
Right,
end up in
right,
certain positions that she held at
right,
certain ages. He was
right.
able to tell that whoever her mother was well respected, and this,
Mm-hmm.
like he was able to
Those types of
really,
things. Right,
yes,
right.
make the sketch come to real life for us.
Yeah, yeah.
It
And I
was
know
amazing.
that the way that they identified um, by whether it mulatto or Creole or Sambo or words like that, he could
Yes,
tell things based on
yes,
that. Who
correct.
fathered them, yeah, those types of
Right.
things.
Yes, so
Wow.
with Minnie, she had of the 14 children, there was all different mixtures. Some were referred to as Black, and some were
Hmm.
referred to as mulatto, some Sambo. Sambo is when a Black person has a child with a mulatto person, a half Black, half white person. So that child is 3/4 Black. They're considered Sambo in those writings, in those records, and that sort of thing. When they referred to my 2 times great grandfather, they referred to him as Quadroon Richard Ridgard. His mother was mulatto, his father was white, so he was 1/4 Black, hence Quadroon. So it's, yeah,
Okay.
and you see that in a lot of the older records, of course, the records that are closer to the slavery
Right.
time
Right.
time frame, you will see those things noted. Yeah.
Well, Nat, I could keep going, but I have to be Leslie now and be timekeeper. Um, I promised her I would. This has been so educational and enlightening. I think, being in America for as long as we have, you were born here. I
Right.
moved here when I was 8 or 9. We hear a lot about the enslaved people and the descendants of the enslaved in America, but I think
Right.
it's so informative to share some of what you have uncovered
Right.
about this enslaved Africans who were taken to Jamaica in particular, the Caribbean in general. I think it's
Right.
so informative, and I'm sure that, as Leslie and I always say, and we mean this because this podcast is here for the duration,
Hmm.
that we will revisit this. There's so many things that I would love to, if we had the time, to unpack and just kind of, maybe
Right.
we'll bring Jassy in with her anthropological point of view and kind of
Right.
tease at some of this, because a lot of her research and that of her former partner, Dr.
Hmm.
Reginald Butler, was done in Virginia.
Okay.
And so they may have a connection with Mr. Dunn that we
Sure.
haven't even touched on.
Explored, right? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, anyway, it's been lovely to spend this time with you.
Thanks,
And
Auntie.
thanks, Auntie. So, folks, this has been another episode of Black Boomer Besties from Brooklyn. Brooklyn.